So we've taught stalling. We now come to teach further stalling exercises. The aim is to demonstrate the different stall entry scenarios, so it's scenario-based training more than anything else. We need people to understand the scenarios that they could inadvertently stall the aircraft, many of which are due to accelerated stalls. However, no matter how you stall the glider, the standard recovery remains the same. It's stick centrally forward, regain flying speed, and then return to the normal attitude. In terms of threat and error management, the further stalling exercises are designed as demonstrations. The student pilot does not necessarily need to fly these exercises. Also, the further stalling and indeed the further spinning, the stall itself can be quite alarming and you may get adverse student reactions, so it's very worthwhile doing initial demonstrations with our hands and feet off the controls as demonstrations only. Again, accelerated stalls can lead to accelerated spins, so you do need to give yourself some extra height over and above the standard stalling exercises in case you do get an accelerated spin entry. Also, think about the glider that you're going to choose to demonstrate some of these exercises. Some of the older types, K13s, Pulcatses, have very large elevator controls and are very easy to get accelerated stalls. Many of the modern types of glider have much smaller control surfaces and can be a little bit challenging in order to get an accelerated stall out of the aircraft. So think about what glider you're going to get out of the hangar before you demonstrate these exercises. Why do we teach these? Well, we teach these exercises because under certain circumstances, not all pre-stall symptoms are present, or indeed may be missed. And it's trying to give them an understanding or a further understanding of how speed and loading are interrelated. There are certain cues which can be convincingly misleading. One of those cues, unfortunately, is attitude and speed. If we roll back to one of the first lessons we taught our students, indeed probably one of the first lines of patter they were given, is look over the nose, this is the normal gliding attitude. And the student will come to understand that the normal attitude will lead to a normal speed. It's not necessarily the case. Similarly, they will get a certain feel for the aircraft and may be a little bit confused when it starts to feel different. We also want to put different scenarios to these exercises, and when we fly the exercise or demonstrate the exercise, we want to hit the student with a punchline. So it might be on the accelerated stall pulling out of the dive. The punchline might be, so remember, if we find ourselves pulling out of the dive, we mustn't do so too sharply. It needs to be smooth and progressive. When we go about teaching these, well, clearly they must have an understanding of basic stalling. So these are done post-basic stalls, but not necessarily all at once. We can drop them into whichever phase of flight we feel might be appropriate. So if we come onto the stall by increasing G by pulling out of a dive, you may well want to teach that alongside launch failures off a winch launch. That would be appropriate. So, what are the further stalling exercises? We have the difference between reduced G and a stall. Again, this is where our senses can be convincingly misleading. If we've done a lot of stalling and never experienced reduced G, we may confuse the sensation or a falling sensation with a stall. Another one is the elevator is ineffective at raising the nose at the point of the stall. This is simply a reinforcement exercise of what they should already know. We have a high-speed stall where we load the glider up by pulling out of a dive and the stall speed increases because of that. And on a similar note, we have the stall speed increasing the turn, where we load the glider by turning it. When we brief our students, we obviously want to brief the exercises, but also give them an understanding of the background. So they need to understand factors affecting total lift and stall speed. They need to be briefed scenarios for each exercise, and they need the point of the exercise. Coming back to the factors affecting total lift and stall speed, the standard lift equation is very good for explaining a lot of these further stalling exercises. So the first one that we often teach students is the difference between stalling and reduced G. So the aim of this exercise is to demonstrate the difference between reduced G and a stall. So what situations where that we might get reduced G? Well, this could include launch failures, this could include flying in turbulence, and flying a Ventus with trailing edge brakes. Simply opening the air brakes can actually produce a significant nose down pitch and reduced G feeling. So there are many situations where we can get reduced G. Pre-flight briefing. Well, we want to talk to the student about reduced G, what it is, what causes it, and also the symptoms of a stall. And just because we have a falling sensation or a reduced G sensation in the stall doesn't necessarily mean to say that it's the same as reduced G. The stall and reduced G are two different things. Reduced G, we're probably flying, not necessarily stall. In flight. This is a flight where we definitely have the students' hands and feet off the controls. One of the purposes of this flight is to see whether pilots are reduced G sensitive, which I'll talk about in a minute. So it's a demonstration only exercise. The first part of the exercise, we will demonstrate a nose drop stall and point out to the student we have a falling sensation and the elevator is ineffective at raising the nose. We need to move the stick forward to regain flying speed and then return to the normal attitude. After we've flown that demonstration, then we demonstrate reduced G. In this demonstration, we will probably start the exercise at about 70 knots, gently raise the nose, and then push over the top. As we're pushing, try and get about half a G, or the same sort of reduced G you probably experienced in the stall. But this time we want to demonstrate that if we move the stick back, not only can we raise the nose, but the reduced G sensation stops immediately. That is reduced G, not a stall. Post-flight debrief is if a student is flying along and they feel reduced G, they mustn't immediately assume they've stalled. They need to work it out with the elevator. So if they move the stick back gently and they've still got reduced G, the likelihood is they've stalled it and they need to move the stick forward to recover. As some background reading, it is probably worthwhile reading an article published by Derek Piggott called Subgravity Sensations and Gliding Accidents, where he describes a number of accidents because of reduced G. Interesting enough, on the reduced G, when we're teaching stalling, we never talk about the feeling of falling or a reduced G when we teach stalling initially. The students will work that out for themselves. And again, we do not want them to have this link between a reduced G and a stall. The two are separate. If you're flying and you come across an oversensitive student, and oversensitivity is the students will often pull their head back and to one side, and in extreme cases put their arms forward and sometimes scream. The definition of a very oversensitive student is they become incapable of rational thought. So if you do find somebody who is a reactor, stop the exercise immediately, come down and land and report to your CFI. Okay. Second exercise is the lack of effective elevator at raising the nose at the point of the stall. This is a simple reinforcement exercise. It's to reinforce the fact that if the nose is going down and you cannot raise it with the elevator, the glider is probably stalled. Pre-flight briefing. Just recap the stalling symptoms and the final stall symptom that the elevator is ineffective at raising the nose at the point of the stall. In flight, when we fly the demonstration, similarly, you want to demonstrate how the elevator is effective in normal flight. So fly the glider at about 50 knots, move the stick forward and point out that the nose goes down. Then move the stick back and point out that the nose rises. Keep pulling the stick back until the nose is about 30 degrees nose high, and the stick should be about just slightly aft of neutral. At the point of stall, in other words, just as you feel the nose start to drop, bring the stick back and demonstrate to the student that even though the stick is back, the nose is going down. The elevator is completely ineffective at raising the nose. The recovery, move the stick forward, regain flying speed. Post-flight debrief, again, just reinforce the message to the student that the elevator will not raise the nose further or stop the nose going down at the point of the stall, and stall recovery should always be taken once that's detected. To give you some idea of how difficult this is or can be for people who don't realise what's going on, there's quite a good documentary about the Airbus which mush stalled into the sea from 33,000 feet, and it was only in the last few thousand foot they realised what was happening. Sadly, there was not enough height to recover. Okay. The next one is the high-speed stall. The aim is just to remind students that abrupt elevator movements will load the airframe and could possibly stall the aircraft. The flight exercise is quite complicated because in order to set the glider up in nose down attitude at low speed, we're required to actually put it into a nose drop stall. There's no other way of getting it in a nose low attitude at low speed. So you need to brief the student that even though you're going to stall it once, that's not the stall that they should be interested in. It is merely the pull out of the dive and the speed at which they can feel buffet as they pull out of the dive. So in flight, because we're looking at an increase in stalling speed, we need to stall the glider in a 1G situation, exactly the same as you would a mush stall. So bring the speed back at about 1 knot per second and ask the student to tell you at what speed they can feel the buffet. Always fly these exercises using the student's ASI if you can see it, because there's almost always a difference between the two. And let's say we're doing this in a K13. You might find the 1G stall happens at 34 knots, something like that, and then recover from it. The second bit of the exercise is we set up this sharp nose drop stall. Once the nose has pitched down, bring the stick smartly onto the backstop and get the student to read out the speed that they can feel buffeting on the airframe. Again, in the K13, that happens normally at about 50 knots, 48, 50 knots. So they should be able to see that the stalling speed is significantly higher pulling G than in a 1G stall. Post-flight debrief, Just emphasise to the student that if they ever find themselves in a situation where they are pointing nose down, they need to be smooth about applying backstick to recover from the dive. Situations could be recovering from a stall or a failed spin attempt, launch failures, or indeed there have been a number of gliders that have mush stalled into the ground where people have left the round out too late and brought the stick back sharply from 10 foot and they've mush stalled into the ground. Just be careful about excessive speed. If you're doing this exercise and the speed's gone beyond about 55 or 60 knots, it's probably worthwhile abandoning the exercise and starting again from the beginning.